February marked the reanimation of the perpetual conflict between the DNC's favorite boogeyman, Russia, and the swamp's laundromat, Ukraine. And for the first time since then, Tucker Carlson's favorite strip club manager, Zelensky, left his homeland yesterday, touching down in the heart of the most corrupt place on the planet, yes, the DC swamp. And oh my goodness, what a shock it was to find out that Zelensky fit right into that circle jerk like he's been a member for years. You know, one could almost consider the idea that he was somehow placed in his position of power by these very same people. But I digress. Now to set the stage, China's favorite Republican side chick, Mitch McConnell, said on Tuesday, quote, "Providing assistance for Ukrainians to defeat the Russians is the number one priority of the United States right now, rah, rah, rah," something like that. Now, after flying in on an American aircraft, Zelensky delivered an address before Congress, no doubt, obviously written by those very same people listening, telling the lawmakers, and of course all of us, that the American people hadn't sacrificed enough for the war against those pesky Ruskies, and to think of the deficit spending and transfer of wealth as an investment in globalism rather than a handout to the elites. Quote, "We have artillery, yes, thank you. We have it. Is it enough? Honestly, not really. Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security and democracy we handle in the most responsible way." Irony overload, if you will. If there was ever a place or time or group of people to discuss responsibility in any way, it would be the DC swamp currently. Just wow, that's all I can really say. But wait a minute, folks, it gets a lot worse. Our bloodthirsty hired hands in DC gobbled this war porn up like horny 16-year-old boys, orgasms everywhere, all night long. Now, speaking of war porn, here's Lindsey Graham's take on things last night, courtesy of Twitter. One of the most impressive speeches ever given at the hashtag MSC or anywhere was given by President Zelensky of Ukraine. He continued. He laid out in no unnecessary terms the price of appeasement and reaffirmed his nation's determination to defend freedom. Now, just food for thought, since we're on the topic of freedom, Ukraine, and Zelensky. I wonder if Lindsey Graham will ever get questioned by our lovely press corps about his thoughts on Zelensky shutting down churches and imprisoning religious leaders. Probably not. Now here's another wonderful Twitter take from one of California's finest, Adam Schiff. Honored to hear President Vladimir Zelensky tonight, the Churchillian figure of our time. He continues, "When we last met, I told him how inspired I was by him and how the U.S. would always stand by his people. He concludes today the commitment is as ironclad as ever. We are with you, Mr. President." And if you thought the orgy stopped there, think again. Listen to what David Frum at The Atlantic had to say. Quote, "He, Zelensky, came to thank the U.S. for supporting Ukraine. It is Americans who should thank him," unquote. Are you fucking kidding me? Of course, this buffoon continues on. Quote, "What the Western world is getting in return for its aid is a powerful recommitment to its own best self. We didn't believe the Ukrainians could do it, in part because we didn't believe we could do it. But they did, and so did we. And we look now at both Ukraine and ourselves in new ways." Correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but didn't we just basically stroke checks to these people? Anyways, continuing on. Quote, "The extremists and conspiracists and populists and authoritarians and kleptocrats and theocrats who have all gained so much ascendancy in recent years, they do not speak for us." That small man in the oval green jersey at the rostrum or platform of the House of Representatives, he spoke for us. And the reception given to him today by the President and by Congress told the world that his words had been heard and received and understood by the great democracy-minded majority of Americans, unquote. Here's a newsflash. Congress neither speaks for me, nor do they represent me, as I doubt they represent you. despite their duty to do so. In fact, Congress does not speak for America in general, and they do not represent America clearly. In fact, it's overwhelmingly obvious that its members are more dedicated to self and foreign interests and self and foreign investments than American ones. Now, before we move on to a Tucker clip, I have a question. Do those behaviors and allegiances not adequately define what it means to be a traitor? I'd wager so.
As far as we know, no one's ever addressed the United States Congress in a sweatshirt before, but they love him much more than they love you. Welcome to Tucker Carlson's Night. Remember when Sam Bankman-Fried showed up in Washington wearing a T-shirt and spouting nonsense, and all the self-described geniuses declared him a hero? The media, the Congress, the White House, they all love this weird little guy called Sam Bankman-Fried. Do you remember that? Somehow we were reminded of it today when the president of Ukraine arrived at the White House dressed like the manager of a strip club and started to demand money. Amazingly, no one threw him out. Instead, they did whatever he wanted. American taxpayers declared Joe Biden will continue to give Zelensky whatever he demands for, quote, as long as it takes. Tellingly, Biden never specified what it is, as long as it takes to do what? Push the Russian army back to pre-invasion borders? Sounds reasonable. That's what most Americans likely assume, those who are still paying attention. But that is not what Zelensky means, and it is not what he is asking for. Zelensky is demanding regime change in Russia, just like in Iraq and Libya and a long list of other failed states, except this time in the heart of the Eurasian landmass, next door to the entire civilized world. That's what Zelensky has called for repeatedly, and every dollar we send to him goes toward that end. And at this point, he's getting a lot closer to achieving it. So what happens if he, quote, wins? What does the ensuing chaos look like? Thought about that? Who's going to secure the world's largest nuclear arsenal once we help Zelensky topple the Russian government? Who replaces Putin? Strangely, those topics did not come up today, because that wasn't the point. The point of today's visit to Washington was not to make the world more stable or make wise decisions, much less to help America. That's always at the bottom of the list. The point was to fawn over the Ukrainian strip club manager and hand him billions more dollars from our own crumbling economy. It is hard, in fact, it may be impossible to imagine a more humiliating scenario for the greatest country on earth. And we would love to blame Joe Biden for it, but we can't really, not entirely at least. This was bipartisan masochism. The Uniparty is alive and well despite the best efforts of voters, including last month. And if you doubt that it's alive and well, here's a picture of Zelensky that he had taken with a group of elderly Republican senators in Kiev back in May. They stand grinning next to him in their orthopedic shoes, 70-year-old Susan Collins, John Barrasso, John Cornyn, led by their 80-year-old ringleader, Mitch McConnell. 44-year-old Zelensky poses between them in a skin-tight polo shirt, flexing like a weightlifter and trying to look ferocious. They seem awestruck. Not since a young Fidel Castro showed up in New York wearing battle fatigues has this country's aging leadership class tittered more loudly in delight. They love a man in uniform. What a hunk. So strong and decisive. Look at the expression of Mitch McConnell's face. You could almost hear the giggles of pleasure. No rational person assessing the issues ever would have predicted this moment. If you were a Republican office holder and Zelensky came to Washington, maybe you would, for a moment, ask him about his current and ongoing war against Christianity in Ukraine, especially if you were, say, Mitch McConnell or John Cornyn, and a lot of your own voters go to church on Sunday. They might care about that issue. But McConnell and Cornyn didn't mention that. They didn't say a word. You will not hear a word on television tonight about the fact that Zelensky has banned an entire ancient Christian denomination in Ukraine, and then seized churches, and then thrown priests into jail. According to Mitch McConnell, who apparently hasn't left his office since the mid-'80s, anti-Christian despotism is what most Republicans want above all. They don't get enough. They're just begging for it. Watch McConnell explain.
Providing assistance for the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians, that's the number one priority for the United States right now, according to most Republicans. That's sort of how we see the challenges confronting the country at the moment.
And two other senators stand behind him, nodding like it's true. Defeating Putin is, quote, the number one priority among Republicans, says Mitch McConnell, who leads Republicans in the Senate. Number one? Before our own economy? Or our own children's schools? Or for that matter, before the more than 2,000 young people killed last year by fentanyl in Mitch McConnell's, quote, home state of Kentucky? Punishing Vladimir Putin for putting Donald Trump in office is more important than all of that, says Mitch McConnell. Ukraine's borders matter. Ours don't matter.
Well, folks, it's been about a year since I've done this, so I appreciate your patience as I begin to knock the dust off the microphone, so to speak. I'll try to throw together at least 2 of these a week moving forward. If you liked it, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment down below. There's a PayPal link in the description box, so please put $1 in the bucket on the way out the door. I'd like to thank everyone for all your donations. They're much needed and much appreciated. Now, with all that being said, we'll see you next time.
Come on, move. Move. Easy, easy.